Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. We go through this every time. Good afternoon. Is that better? I'm eating it. Welcome to all of you. I'm Carrie Otto. I'm the lady with the microphone that I always have trouble with. But anyway, I want to welcome all of you here today. We've got a great program for you. But before we begin, I must remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Thank you very much. Thank our tech team, which is terrific, and we're so glad to have them. Our photographer Bill George as well. It's tremendous. And today we have Nada helping, of course. It's my life, my story, and it's kind of her baby. So she's going to be in charge of that. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you what's the coming attractions are. In November, we have two performances. We have on the 18th 18th, we have Bill George, and here's Johnny.
Here's Johnny.
Looking forward to that one. And the following week, on the 25th, we're going to start thinking about Thanksgiving seriously, and we have Bob Alford that's going to tell us the Pilgrim story, and believe me, it's going to be authentic. What you hear from Bob is going to be the real stuff, so be sure to come to both of those. Then in December, we take the month off. There's too many other things going on, and so we just won't meet them. But remember to come back in January because there's more stuff coming up. So anyway, today I would like to introduce you to Sharon Bonesteel Mann. Sharon's kind of a new resident, not
Almost a year.
too much, almost a year, but she's got quite a story to tell, which I'm sure you will enjoy. When we finish, we hopefully will have time for questions, so we'll let Sharon get started.
Normally, what I tell people is turn your cell phones off, because if they ring during my class, it's $5 for the instructor's drink fund. So good afternoon. When I started to think about doing this, I had to ask myself, why should I do this? I mean, I'm retired. I want to just kind of relax and paint. So what's in it for me? Well, I still have a couple of boxes at least worth of battery stuff, and I'd really like to get rid of them. So I thought, what a great way to basically sum up what I felt was a big accomplishment in my life and whittle those down to the last 10 documents I want to keep and out of here. And I just like telling stories. So I'm hoping this will also encourage you to bring your story up, because I know I have been fascinated by the stories that others have told about just the oddest things I never thought to think about. So what's in it for you? Batteries are such an important part of our lives these days in ways we don't even know. I just had my knee replaced about 5 weeks ago, all through the hospital. All of the equipment, battery operated. You know, I love it. So I want to kind of clarify what energy storage looks like versus just batteries. And I want to start separating some of the myths from the truth. Things like you cannot wash an electric car, things like that. So I encourage you to ask those questions, and if it needs to be asked right this second, go ahead and interrupt me. But otherwise, I'm going to try to save 15 minutes in the end to make sure we answer all your questions. And I do tend to wander, so if I'm blocking your view right this second, give me a second. So first of all, just a little bit of who I am. I am a licensed architect in Arizona and California. I am a certified building official. That means that I work on the codes and standards that relate to safety in many arenas, primarily the built environment. I am also a commercial energy inspector, and all that means is that I've done a lot of studies and have learned all the technical stuff that's in the code, which I can never remember, but I usually know where to look and find it. I am also Salt River Project's voting representative to those organizations that write the codes. So I worked for Salt River Project for 11 years. Fabulous company, fabulous entity. I really had a wonderful, wonderful time working with them. The real big achievement was kind of hit in 2021 when I received the Energy Storage Association's Breakthrough Woman of the Year. I even impressed the CEO of Salt River Project. So that he sent me an email and said, wow. So for me, that was a national and international recognition. They stated it was in recognition of all of the safety training, safety protocols, and collaboration that I had done with fire departments and building departments and utilities and industry to help make the use of batteries more safe. So start with the best. I got my award. So what is this codes and standards stuff? Well, this has to do with rules, regulations, and criteria on how to safely utilize this new technology. So we've had regular batteries around for years and years. You know, we all know what a lead acid battery is. You know, we tried to make them more efficient. They all evaporate air, they evaporate water out of them, and we have to keep adding water. We came up with these neat little things. You screw in the top, it catches the water vapor, condenses, it drops back into the battery. Well, if you're a utility with 3,000 batteries, this makes a difference in manpower. So we understood all the hazard and risk that's with lead acid batteries. We were using them for standby power, for uninterrupted power. Hospitals use them a lot. But we hadn't really started thinking of them as energy storage. So the codes were set up to deal with the liquids or the electrolyte of the lead acid batteries. Those determine quantities, which determine what kind of a fire resistance rating you needed on the room or how it was ventilated. But then we started to have these lithium-ion batteries. And the first myth I want to dispel is lithium metal and lithium-ion batteries are two totally different things. If you have a pile of lithium metal, and I know my chemist is out there somewhere, you put water on it, it's going to explode. If you take a lithium-ion cell, you can pour water on it. It's fine. All right? So, big difference. This came to our front of mind when there was a fire at an electric car repair shop in northern Phoenix. The guy came running out of the building. The first thing the fire chief asks is, anybody in the building? And the guy says, no, but there's lithium in there. All right. All of these senior fire officials, fire chief, everybody said, stop, don't put water on the building. Protect the perimeter. You know, spray the adjacent building and that. They were afraid to spray water on the building because they thought it was lithium metal and it would explode. That was our first clue that we had a lot of education that needed to be done in the arena of the firefighters and the people working on these things. So in about 2018, groups of us started recognizing that we needed to put some stuff in the codes to start to educate people and put some conditions on just where you could put these batteries. The Department of Energy recognized that you had all these different entities. You had the electrical contractors, you had the fire suppression engineers, you had all of these people who were trying to come up with regulations, all working in their own little silo, in their own little focus. Nobody was talking to each other. So part of what the Department of Energy did with their Energy Storage Safety Committee was pull those people together and start sponsoring conferences where we talked about what did we need in the fire code, what did we need in the electrical code in order to deploy these batteries safely. And I was a part of that team. Now, Salt River Project is a great big entity. It is a jurisdiction within Arizona, and maybe someday I'll do a talk on the history of Salt River Project. But they're very siloed. Distribution doesn't talk to generation, who doesn't talk to the sales, who doesn't talk to that. I'm sure you've all worked at companies where that was the case. And what I realized is that this was a subject that was going to affect all of us. So being the kind of person I am, I said, well, let's form a group. And I formed the Bat Corps, which had a really cool logo, which I couldn't find, of the Roosevelt Dam with the bat sign up on it. And that was our Bat Corps. And it included people from all the different departments. And what we did is we started bringing the information that I was getting on the national level back to Salt River Project, starting to get it out to the different parts of the company. More than once I was asked, so who authorized you to start this committee? I was like, nobody. Okay, it needed to be done. I started with 3 people. By the time I retired, it had 40, and it involved all of the major departments within Salt River Project. I do not want to get down in the weeds and, get into codes and standards and this technical. What I want to do is give you a good oversight of what's out there. But feel free to toss those questions if you have them. First of all, the basics of a battery. Yeah, it's basically an anode, a cathode. You got sulfuric acid. You get electrons forming, starts an electrical current. They've been around for ages. We've got all different types of batteries. Little button batteries, cylindrical ones, small ones. And what I will have up here for you is some samples. For those of you that have Teslas, these are Tesla batteries. There's about 800 to 1,000 of them in a car. This one's loaded, this one isn't. This was the first generation, and they figured out, well, gee, if we make it slightly taller and slightly larger diameter, we could get more energy. So you'll be able to see the 2 Tesla batteries. This is a prismatic battery. That's basically the same thing as a cylindrical one, only crammed into a box, because boxes fit better together than cylinders do. And then you have pouch batteries. And this is an iPhone after it's been in the washer and the dryer. Yeah, that was a loss. And last but not least, my prize here. Does anybody here own that Cadillac Lyric? Well, this is what the batteries look like. This is a Cadillac Lyric battery. It's what's known as a pouch battery. Okay? And it's basically layers of those films, making the battery with the 2 points of connection. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. But you'll be able to come up and see those. So, and we have lots of different chemistries. And the big thing happened with the lithium ion because all of a sudden we had energy density. You know your first cell phone when you plugged it in and it only lasts so long, and then you got a new one? And gee, it lasted a lot longer. That's because they've improved the energy density of the battery. So what you started to see was all of these power tools who now had lithium-ion batteries. They could actually be used in a commercial sense. Hello. This right here is a Tesla, one of the early series megapacks, put on a trailer. What they did was they took it into an area where they had flooding and the lines were down. And they were able to power some essential services just by bringing that in on the back of a trailer. And then you have uses in mobility. Everything from the little hoverboard, scooters, buses, and a majority of the interest came from the trucking industry, who wanted to be able to have their large delivery vehicles powered electrically. So the batteries on these are up on top, but in the car, they're in the bottom of the car. They're in the bottom down here. So you have your motors that are operating your wheels, but the power is all stored in what they call a sled. So one of the first issues the firefighters got into was, if it's a gasoline car, we're going to pour tons of water on it. If we pour tons of water on this electric car, it doesn't get anywhere near where that battery is. So somebody came up with what looked like a yard sprinkler on a pipe. You slid it under the car, the idea of spraying water underneath to cool the batteries. But all of this has been evolving through the last 10 years as we started to have these batteries deployed in more ways. Had a lot of residential and commercial uses, looking at what makes sense to back solar with a battery, because then you can take advantage of when the sun shines, and you can store the energy and use it when the sun doesn't shine. Or when prices are very high, you can use the battery's energy that you stored when energy was very inexpensive. So lots of uses coming down the pike. And these are the utility scale batteries. And these are two main ways that we started to see them. One of them was modular. And this is a Tesla Megapack, one of the early phases. And these are the battery racks. And this is all the battery management system, or the BMS. That's the brains of the system. Part of what we got into with some of the inexpensive scooters that were coming out of China, no offense to China, but a lot of them were coming in without a BMS. So it wasn't regulating the temperature of the battery cells. It wasn't moderating how they were charged and discharged. And New York Fire Department was about ready to pull their hair out because they were starting fires. People would take them into their apartments, plug them into charge, and the battery would start on fire, and then it would take a whole apartment down, or those sorts of things. So New York Fire Department was very early on one of the movers and shakers in terms of getting some regulations on the books on how to deal with those sorts of things. And one of the key things they were looking at is that the batteries had been tested by somebody like Underwriters Labs. The United States has many, we call them NERDLs. They're testing labs. They get funding from the federal government. They work with universities and do research projects. And the patents that they develop, they can then sell to US corporations to utilize in improving the company's product or methods and that sort of thing. So testing labs became a very important part of this whole use of new technology. On the upper right-hand side, this is a building with battery racks, and each one of those racks is a series of packs made either out of those cells all lined up or of little pouches all lined up. And at the top of each one of those racks is the BMS, which is controlling, monitoring those cells within those racks. You really can't tell from the outside that that building is full of batteries. That became one of the issues. These on the lower left, sorry to you guys, these are flow batteries. As we evolved through dealing with the potential fire risk, we discovered that this arrangement here, not good. Not good. Because if you get one cell in here that through a manufacturing defect or some other overcharging or discharging thing starts getting heated up and goes into an internal thermal issue, it can transfer to the others around it and then engulf the whole building, and it's very hard to separate once you're in that position. So the industry changed fairly quickly to modular type installations because they were much safer. And these were tested by Underwriters Lab and others using a UL 9540 test, which basically looked at how does, if a fire starts in one of the cells, how does it propagate to the other cells around it and to the container itself. And that was a big part of getting these commercialized, is making sure we had a method to test and make sure that they were properly safe. And flow batteries are another totally different animal. Now, I really like these because they're very safe. What you have is 2 tanks, and they can be the size of your refrigerator, or they can be the size of those big gas cylinders that you see in ports of call and that sort of thing. And quite often these use vanadium in different charges, and they run it through a central chamber that has a membrane that allows the electrons to pass through. And in the process, they get that electrical circuit going, and they can capture the power from that. And why they're so safe is, first of all, the liquid itself has less than dangerous properties. I don't want to say too much in that. But once you drain the tank back to the 2 separate tanks, there's no hazard there at all. The only hazard is whether or not the tank might leak, and we deal with that through what we call secondary containment. The tank is in a tank, and the tank is in a pit. But these are very promising because they allow for scalability. It can be small, like the ones in the prior slide. They're about less than the size of a train engine, or they can be scaled up to be huge. So those have a lot of potential. Your cylindrical batteries are basically jelly rolls, right? It's the positive and the negative electrode rolled up with isolators and this nice little compact little packet. Now, if you hear somebody saying, oh, well, that's a 18650 battery, or let's see, what is Tesla using now? Tesla's got them up to, what are they? 4680 cells. All that refers to is the diameter and the height. So that's how you impress your friends and just, oh, well, do you know what an 18650 is? So, simple system. Yes? Right. They weigh about as much as a linebacker, and they're full of these. So they're about this thick, about this wide. They weigh about 280 pounds, and there's a whole bunch of these cylinders all through it. And then there's also a glycol system that flows through it that moderates the temperature. Mm-hmm. Then you have your prismatic, which are basically the same thing as the cylinder, only they've put them in a nice box that stacks nice and easily together. And the pouch ones, like the phone, or I believe Porsche uses pouch cells in their cars. And what we are getting into with the containers is they are basically a cell in a module in a rack that makes an array. So if you see some of those things that look like containers with a lot of adjacent wiring, more than likely it's a battery energy storage system. Now this is actually one of my favorite cars, and you can see all the batteries are down here in the bottom. Okay? So each one of these is a pack. This is a Lucid Air. In the Lucid Air, they use cylindrical cells. So each one of those little packs there is full of, 100 or so of these cells, all wired together along one plate. Now, one of the things that Lucid Air said was, these batteries are really good initially, but then they fade off. Think of your cell phone. Works really well the first few years, and as you get towards the end of life, it doesn't stay charged as long, that sort of thing. Same situation here, and with a car, you want them at their peak performance. So what Lucid said is, what if we made these so they came apart and went into a big pack that could be used as energy storage for a solar system? So they have designed their car so these packs can be removed and put into this racking system, and they have a second life. Now, there are a lot of people who are trying to take old Nissan Leaf batteries and take those packs out of the cars and try to turn them into energy storage. The difficulty is, something designed for something else, not quite smooth transition. But that was one of the things with Lucid Air, is they really wanted their car to be designed for this future use. Now, why do we even need energy storage? A utility like SRP or APS or TEP they have multiple forms of energy generation. You've got the nuclear plant, you've got coal plants, you've got a dam where you release the water and through generators. They have gas jet engines, they have biomass, they have thermal energy. So they're all trying to have their fingers in a lot of different generators. And what they're looking for is the best price. Keep the cost of generating that electricity as low as possible. Now, the way people use the energy is it starts up around 6 in the morning, and it goes up until it hits a peak. And in our area, that's between 3 and 7, give or take. And then it starts back down. So all of this in here is unused capacity. We have the ability to generate more, but we're not using it because we don't have anywhere to store it. So that is why utilities have made a big push to get energy storage, because when they're down here, they can run the plant, store up that energy, and then when they hit these peaks, they can utilize that energy to shave the peak. In every industry, I think there's that watershed point where everybody's mentality changes. And in the battery industry, this APS battery explosion was that point. Hunter Clare, this gentleman right here, his hazmat team was called out when a motorist driving by saw pink smoke coming out from this enclosure. They didn't know what it was. Fire department was called. The fire department went out and said, somebody said this was a battery. Does that look like a battery? Well, I had been trying to get the first responders to come to my classes. And I was getting a lot of building officials and building inspectors because they were getting the plans coming in. And they were looking at those plans. And they were saying, Sharon, call the battery lady. What the heck is this? So the fire departments were not getting as much training throughout the nation as they needed. So these guys show up, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with this thing that's obviously burning. And all of their sensors are telling them we've got lots of explosive gases, we've got bad stuff going on here. What do we do? Well, they followed all the proper protocols of the time. They consulted with lots of different firefighters and experts around the valley. And after a couple of hours, they decided it was okay to go in. So they opened the door, they tested some of the air. They said, okay, it's probably okay. And then the team started to go in, and it exploded. And part of what we all believe or have concluded is that it was, think about your car, and it can get too rich or too clean and it won't run. You have to be in that perfect little spot. Well, the same thing with some of these explosions. Once they introduced additional oxygen into that space, it brought it down into that explosive range, and it blew. It blew Hunter and his guy behind him 70 feet. Fence tore their breathing apparatus off of them, took the whole group of them. There were firefighters that went to the hospital that night, and The next morning, I was on the phone to my team, and we, at that point in time, SRP didn't actually own any energy storage. We had power purchase agreements with various companies. But we sent out a letter to them and said, we're not going to tell you to shut down. That's your call. But we want you to go through your installation and do your safety checks, because something happened here. We don't know what it was exactly yet. And what we were looking for was, what was that root cause that caused that first cell to short circuit, overheat. When it overheated, it was having such a good time, it got its friends all involved, and they got overheated, and that's what a thermal runaway is. You have one cell. It could have a manufacturing defect. It could get punctured. It could have been damaged in transit. And it starts. So we were looking for what was the solution. I a week and was asked to come teach the firefighters about batteries. And I had two classes. I had a class on the east side that had about 70 firefighters, one on the west side that had about 100. Basically went through what it is, what you have to do, those sort of things. And none of us were perfect at that point in time. We were all still learning. So again, this isn't up close. You see each one of those is like a drawer that pulls out. It's about 100 of those cells or 100 packs. They all are connected to a BMS and an inverter, and then it all goes back into the system. This is where they literally tore that chain link fence guys through it. Hunter is now still working for Glendale Fire. He is, it's kind of like PTSD, but he's now helping teach firefighters about energy storage, safety protocols, and that sort of thing. And that day I taught the multiple firefighters. I made him a promise that I would do everything I could to make sure that didn't happen again. And I got even more forceful about it, and we started requiring any of our power purchase agreements. And remember, we don't own those batteries at SRP. We're just buying the power from them. But we started putting into our request for proposal that they had to include training for the firefighters. So many hours every single year, because the firefighters change stations. You know, you might be training a group that comes out this year, but the next year is somebody different. So we actually got into all of the contracts. APS followed us, and we started requiring them to do these kinds of trainings and to do some of these safety protocols. This, first of all, is the tent where, as they pulled the cells or the racks out and pulled the packs out, they had to de-energize them, which can be almost as dangerous as charging them. So each one of those packs was brought in, connected to a load, and run and monitored until it was totally drained of all the energy. Then they were all packaged up and they were sent back to a testing lab that evaluated all of them. And yes, that's me in my hard hat. This right here is shortly after all of these incidents, I was invited back to New York to their fire training facility to give some classes on pre-incident planning. In other words, when the developer comes in and says, this is what I want to do, and you're looking at things on paper, how easy it is to move something another 5 feet, get maybe a greater separation distance between things so one didn't start another one on fire. But I went back there and did that kind of training. They were also testing a new product called Fire Ice, which they were hoping would put out lithium-ion fires. Well, really didn't work. We did the test. Hey, look, the battery's out. And we're going to put it in this barrel with kind of like cat litter. And we're sitting there watching the next test, and next thing you know, smoke starts coming out of that barrel. So, didn't work. But these are the sort of facilities where we need to do testing. We need to be able to take some of these new products and really put them to the test, as they say. So that was the facility out there where we were doing testing. And this is their training site for training some of the new firefighters and how to deal with those kind of disaster conditions. Now I'm going to quickly take you through some of the sites that have been built in the last few years. This is Graceland out in California. This is a peaker battery. It's designed to work with a gas power plant. So if we're running on, let's say, the nuclear power, and we know we're coming up on one of those peaks and we need extra energy, we want to fire up the gas peaker because that'll give us additional energy to meet that peak. Well, it takes time to get the generator up and going and running. So what they do is they utilize the batteries to transition from that immediate need up until the time that the gas peaker plant can start generating electricity. This one is interesting, Moss Landing. Any of you have been out there? You see those great big 2 tall towers from the old power plant. The coal portions of that and the other generation portions are shut down, and it's now a great big battery site. They have 2 or 3 different sites there. What they were doing is they were jamming these battery packs into the various segments of the old concrete building and then tying them together, putting in sprinkler systems. What was interesting is each one of these little cabinets here had a new system on it where it had water in jets on each one of those trays, so that if something happened in this tray right here with a cell in there, they could shut that whole cube down and flood some water just on that little section. Water will not put out a lithium-ion fire. All it will do is cool it down. So you have that cell. It's had a manufacturing defect. It's a short. It gets started. It's heating. And it wants to warm up the people around it. The water, all it does is cool it down. It continues to burn itself out. And it doesn't get hot enough to get the other ones in on the party. So it's on a sensor, but it is also controlled, yeah. The had 2 fires there, neither of which were fires. One of them was they were doing construction in a nearby piece of property. The dust kicked up, it set off the fire alarm, which started the sprinkler, which then short-circuited some of the electrical stuff. That was one of them. Another one was a fan unit in one of the air conditioners burned out a motor and generated smoke and started a little fire with the fan, and that turned on the sprinklers, which triggered the batteries, electrical short. So all of this, we're all learning. We're all moving forward. But pretty much everybody is going with the new concept of we're going to do it as a cube. This cube has everything we need, and if it does have a short circuit and we get a thermal incident in one of the cells, we can let that entire cube burn itself out without it affecting the one on either side. Now, you want to try to teach a firefighter something difficult? Teach them to stand there and not do anything. It is so against their nature. They want to go in there and pour water on it because, what do you say, Dave? Small fire, small water, big fire, big water. They want to do something. That's what they're trained for. They live in fear that somebody's going to drive by and say, why are those firefighters just standing around? Shouldn't they be spraying water on something? So it was a big ask to get these guys to realize it was less time and less of an incident if you didn't spray water on it. Let the thing consume itself. It's been tested to not start the ones adjacent to it on fire. Let it go through that whole process. So that's part of what the testing labs did, is they would take a whole cube and they'd burn it up and measure how it affected the other cubes around it. And each one of those cubes had, again, just like a little drawer full of cells or full of pouches, all connected to a battery management system, all connected with its own little air conditioning unit, all modular. They can bring a crane in, pick it up, take it out, bring in another one, drop it in the same place. So that's where this has all gone from, gee, let's put them all in a building with a bunch of racks, to let's control it in small segments. Then we get to the issue of recycling. Now, we talked about how Lucid Air was trying to set up their cars so the battery packs could then be utilized in an energy storage system. There's also that point where you really can't, and you need to get into the cells that are in the sled at the bottom of the car. Well, you want to seal those really well because you don't want road dirt, road water, et cetera, getting inside of them. So that makes it even harder to open them up and get the cells out so that you can recycle them. But there's a lot of work going on that. There was actually a federal contest out to a lot of the universities to come up with ways to recycle batteries. And one of the companies that won one of the grants was Li-Cycle. They actually have a facility over in Gilbert where they are taking lithium-ion batteries in, and there's various ways that you can recycle them. Theirs is to de-energize and then grind them all up, and it becomes a black mass, which they can then sell, but more importantly, safely transport to a user who will separate it out, take the parts that they want, and move on. So a lot is happening in this area. Real interesting website, if you want to go to it, is the EPA's Lithium Battery Recycling Frequently Asked Questions. You could go there once a week, and you'd come up with something new. So this was my last project, the Bolster substation. This was an SRP-owned battery site. It's right over there at Grand and Northern. This is the Tesla Megapack. That site has 34 of them. And another difficulty with the firefighters is, well, just tell us exactly what we're going to run it. Well, we can't yet, because those cells could be lithium, nickel, cobalt, aluminum oxide, or they, right? So technology on the cells is constantly changing, so you don't want the firefighters coming in and saying, oh, it's going to be this, I react this way. You want them to go to that pre-incident plan where it will say, this is the type of cells that are there, this is the actions you need to take. So that's where the pre-incident planning became very important. This is what that installation looked like. These right here are back-to-back Tesla Megapacks. They go to a transformer, and transformer fires, now that's exciting. Yeah, they have to blow a lot of foam on them, and again, it's better to just let them burn. But you can get the oil from those, and that's why they're in these little secondary containment. And so 4 Tesla Megapacks feed to a transformer, which feeds to a switch, which feeds to the control center, which feeds to a 69 kV, and then it feeds it out into our transmission lines. Now, remember I talked about we have the test to make sure it doesn't spread to adjacent units? Tesla had done all the tests on the Megapack. Great big huge installation down in Australia. Before it was even christened, they had a fire. One of them had leaking glycol that started a short circuit and a fire. And oh my, but it spread to the unit behind it. Now what you see on the top, those are exhaust fans. So they're constantly bringing air through to maintain the temperature within those units. And what they discovered was the test, that UL 9540 test, was done with a maximum of 30-mile-an-hour winds. This big installation is right in a valley where they filled it with windmills. Nobody bothered to check what the winds were expected to be, and they didn't realize that they exceeded that 30-mile-an-hour wind speed that they had been tested to. So what Tesla did, I don't care for the guy, but he's got some good people working for him. This issue, they came back to us at SRP and said, we have a fix for this. You're scheduled for this week. We're going to come out and we're going to install that fix on all of your batteries. And that's one of the reasons I really, really like them. But it had to do with having some dampering so that that couldn't cause that situation again. So these are the battery packs when you take the doors off. Each one of these is a separate drawer. If you could lift like 500 or 600 pounds, you could pull it out and change it. They have a special rack that they all feed into the battery management. It all feeds into a main conductor line that goes off to the transformer. This right here is a pumping system that pumps a glycol through the entire system, which helps maintain a perfect temperature for the cells to operate. They even had some issues where that glycol mix wasn't quite perfect, so they came out and drained it and replaced it. So these are Tesla packs. This was the site. We brought the fire department out to do their pre-incident training. They brought their little robot out. That robot is capable of dragging an unconscious firefighter by grabbing the links on the back of his jacket and pulling him out of a dangerous situation. So they got to play with that on the site. And this is another one of my, yay, I did that. There was no consistency in signing. The APS site, the guys didn't know it was a battery. They didn't know it was lithium ion. So the SRP graphic team worked with me, and we developed a sign that referred to the partnership between the fire department and SRP. It identified what the hazard was, where it was, and the information they needed to know. We went beyond that, and we talked APS into doing it too. They had their own little hat on there. But we also took all the other battery sites, Like I said earlier, SRP has about 3,000 batteries of various sizes and shapes, most about that big. Any room or place that had a battery in it, it ended up with one of two signs. If it got this sign, horizontal, it was laid back. That was our lead acid or VRLA batteries. No worries, you can be laid back. If it was vertical orientation, there's lithium in there. Stand up and take notice. So we got those out. Even our new SRP lift trucks that have lithium-ion powered air conditioners, they now have the stickers on them that identify that that's a lithium-ion battery on there. So the firefighters they won't be surprised if they have to deal with a crash or something with that. We helped fund a project with EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute, and they take funding from a lot of different utilities and develop programs and tests, and we share information. We came up with a standard operating procedure for doing testing of the water when the sprinklers comes on and it runs off to test that water and make sure it's not contaminated. This is our training out there. This is the same fire department that responded to the APS incident. We had them out at our site. We did 3 days worth of training with firefighters from all over the valley at that site. And another piece of my puzzle was at one of the tours, a firefighter said, it would be really nice if we had one place on the site where all this important stuff could be and we would know to go there. So this was the First Responder Incident Command Center, and it had the fire alarm indicator panel. It had some outlets so they could charge their phones and their tablets. It had copies of the emergency response plan, had an eye wash kit, lots of stuff like that. Moss Landing, it's a whole room. It's a bigger facility. And it can be just a little 10 by 10 building, but that's where the firefighters know that they can see all the alarm controls and information. And of course, you can't forget about teaching the firefighters how to deal with fires with electric car. And GM did a great job of putting on a whole program. It was hosted over at the Gilbert Fire Training Academy. And we met with all the engineers, and they took the cars apart and showed the firefighters where they could cut and where they couldn't. It was a great, great day. And there's another one of those, what we call sleds, and all the batteries are in the bottom and all sealed in that. That was the training. And you never know when you're going to run into these batteries. This was in one of the airports, a new scooter, and the battery is actually this little thing that pulls out, and I know some of you have those kind of batteries that pull out. And the hospital, with all sorts of equipment that's powered by these things. So, questions? I know we're down to next to no time, so what do we say? If you want to ask questions, ask them now.
This is the time.
Or feel free to
Got
walk
one
out.
back there.
Somehow I knew you were going to ask a question.
I don't have enough technical knowledge to ask any technical
Can't hear you
question.
yet.
I don't have enough technical knowledge to ask you a technical question, but I would guess the military would have a great interest in this sort of thing. And if they do they do the research on this themselves, or do they subcontract it out? Because they, so many of their things are battery operated, and in the middle of a battle, to try to replace a battery,
Yeah.
you better be sure you know what you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things that was very early on in the Department of Energy's committee work was two aspects. One, they were concerned in the fact that a lot of the battery cells were coming from China. And could they somehow program these batteries to do something or work for a certain period of time and then stop or be remote controlled? So there was a lot of concern about that. There was also a lot of concern about whether there was any potential risk, because a lot of them are carrying backpacks that have a lithium cell pack in it, and it powers their radios, it powers some of their electronic site stuff. So yes, they were very involved. Because the labs, all the national labs, get funding from the government, they were very much a part of working with the researchers in those labs in understanding the cells that they were currently using, what other options were available, and a lot of work was being done with military applications for the new batteries. Where they're moving now is to, we had a lot of hope for solid-state batteries to get away from electrolytes that were more dangerous. Those are still a few years away from prime time, but now they're kind of saying, well, maybe we need to go with semi-solid state. So lots of research is continuing on that, and yes, the federal government is involved and very interested. So,
Any other questions? Got one here.
Karen.
Where we lived in California, they were coming out with fire trucks that were run on batteries. And that bothered me, because what if they run out of power, in an emergency?
What if they run out of gas?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Did batteries have as long a range as a gas-powered vehicle? Like even on the, you said the truck drivers were interested.
Mm-hmm,
Do they have enough, or was it for the transfer between gas and power on the trucks? Or?
As the batteries get more energy dense, you get longer range. The faster you drive in the car, the lower that range will be. Our Nissan Leaf, 13 years ago, started out with a range of 100 miles, and by the time we got rid of it, it was down to about 60. Our new EV6, if you're driving around town, you can almost get 400 miles. If we drive on the freeway down to Tucson, it's more like 350, 340. So how you drive it greatly affects your distance. Is it Surprise has the new electric fire truck? It was either Surprise or Glendale, I think, got a new electric fire truck. One of the issues with the fire trucks is they have so much equipment that is operating when the truck is just sitting there. So the old fire trucks, they have to be running the gas engine that whole time. With the combined hybrid and the electric ones, all of that equipment just continues to run on the battery. And the biggest issue that we're dealing with batteries right now is charging. You can have a level 1, plug it into your basic wall socket charger. It'll take you a day to charge your car. A level 2 charger, charge it, in 4 hours. Fast charging, Tesla's working with a lot of those. They're trying to get it down to 15 minutes. And the problem is, when you're trying to do that so quickly, batteries don't like to be charged fast. And so that's the area where a large amount of the research is being done right now, is how do we get charging capability throughout the country? Where do we need it? Do most people charge at home? Do they charge at their businesses? We solve the problem when we go on vacation long ranges, we rent a car. And then the rest of the time we, drive our electric and save money. So,
Any other questions? Are we good? Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. What a career. What a career. Wow.
And I have those batteries and some more little boards up here. If you want to come up and see them close, or you have another question, feel free.
Be sure to come back in 3 weeks' time for Bill George.